Today's episode is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right below this video. For years, or really even for decades, the gun people, as they're sometimes known, the pro-gun activists, the gun fetishists, the National Rifle Association, other groups, they've been warning us. They've been telling us we absolutely need more guns. We need more guns in more places. We need guns everywhere because the government could become tyrannical. It's possible that someone might try to turn the United States into a police state. It could be a president who is a totalitarian nightmare who might do something like deploying the military across the country. And those exact same people have been silent as Donald Trump has said he doesn't care what governors say. He'll send in the military if he wants to suppress protests that are protected by the First Amendment. And in fact, as we saw the National Guard and very militarized police units and riot squads deployed to protests around the country, which have been overwhelmingly peaceful, the NRA and the gun people have said nothing. We saw a riot squad take down Martin Gugino, an unarmed 75-year-old man, knocked over by police, hitting his head, bleeding from his ear, spending nearly a week in the hospital. And the president got involved to attack the protester rather than the police who did this. This is exactly what the NRA and others have been warning us about. And as Matt Cohen writes for Mother Jones, all of those people, all of those groups have been absolutely silent. Wayne LaPierre from the NRA wrote 25 years ago that it's possible that, quote, jackbooted government thugs would get more power to take away our constitutional rights, destroy our property, even injure us, if you can imagine that, if assault weapons were banned, which was the discussion in 1995 when Wayne LaPierre wrote that. We saw during the Barack Obama presidency, the NRA, other gun groups, activists, fear-mongering that Barack Obama, the scary half-black, possibly Muslim foreign guy, was going to come and take everybody's guns. He was going to confiscate all the guns. And it was a true liberal bogeyman. And in reality, Barack Obama presided over one of the largest expansions in gun ownership, a boon for gun sales that we have seen in American history because of that fear-mongering. And now the NRA is silent. The NRA is silent that maybe George Floyd should have had a weapon to defend himself, as they sometimes like to say about people in various sticky situations, as maybe the term is. The NRA completely silent about the repression of protests and police brutality and support and encouragement of that brutality from the president and from many of his Republican colleagues. And yet when state governments were saying, wear a mask 2 months ago, that was supposedly tyrannical repression by the government, which had the gun people out in force at state capitals and on city streets. The reality, of course, is that the NRA and these other groups believe the Second Amendment is fundamentally a defense against liberals. That's really what you need guns for, to defend yourself against liberals and fake liberal bogeymen. The NRA doesn't really care about gun rights or tyranny. They care about selling guns and funneling money to Republicans. And it would be very problematic for the NRA to say at this point, listen, don't we need people to take up guns to protect ourselves from the militarized, tyrannical police and riot gear? It would be terrible for optics if they said that. It would put them at odds with the establishment. It would be seen as encouraging violence. And when they talk about defending the gun rights of law-abiding citizens, the idea in their heads is of a white conservative man. Now, of course, listen, I've been around enough to know they include carefully selected, safe instances of defending the gun rights of soccer moms with a handgun in their purse and, you know, picking out some black folks to hold up as, look, here's some examples. But the silence that we're seeing in light of the recent protests and repression by police surprises nobody who's been paying attention. Remember Philando Castile? Philando Castile was a black man who legally owned a gun. did exactly as instructed by police, was calm, complied, and he was killed without real consequences for the officers involved. Where was the NRA? And after the fact, the NRA came up with this sort of post hoc rationalization from their spokeswoman, Dana Loesch. I don't know if Dana Loesch is still a spokeswoman. She was at the time. And she said, well, the reason we're not coming to the defense of Philando Castile, legal gun owner who did exactly what police asked and was still killed, happened to be black, is he not only had a firearm, he was in possession of a controlled substance at the same time. He had drugs on him, and that's illegal. And that's how the NRA was able to say, whew, we don't have to go out there and defend Philando Castile because he had drugs on him. Ah, right. That must have been what it was. And before I forget, the NRA also exists, I alluded to this before, to funnel dark money to Republicans through political advertising. We saw that in 2016 with the Trump campaign. The NRA helped Trump get elected by funneling shadowy money directly into pro-Trump campaign, online advertising campaigns. Investigations into that were started. They were attempted. They didn't go very far. I think you won't be shocked to hear. So again, back when it was protests because the government wants us to stay home and wear masks when we're out, they brought their guns out. And I was thinking that this is the government tyranny, public health guidelines like mask wearing and holding off on haircuts for the time being. This is the government tyranny. And then now, as we see heavily militarized police forces come out in response to protests about government, right? I mean, when we talk about police using force and killing people, that is government overusing force. The government might become tyrannical. People are missing. They're gone. And in fact, they're criticizing the protesters. So never, ever, ever, ever again, if you ever fell for it to begin with, should you fall for any of these talking points. We need guns because the government might become tyrannical. We always come out in support of people who have been victimized by actors, elements of government and law enforcement. That's not what it's ever been about. It's about selling guns. It's about defending primarily their main constituents, which are conservative white men, with exceptions, of course, and as a funnel conduit for getting money to Republican politicians. That's what they exist for, and they're proving it every single day. Yesterday, we did an entire story about the 75-year-old protester, Martin Gugino, who was attacked by Buffalo police, shoved onto the ground, hit the back of his head, caused bleeding from his ear. Now, I'm not going to give you that full story again because we just did it yesterday. But the big shock since yesterday is that Donald Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, has doubled and tripled down on Donald Trump's attacks of the protester, not of the police. I'll go back a little bit. Yesterday, Donald Trump tweeted about this altercation, quote, "Buffalo protester shoved by police could be Antifa provocateur. 75-year-old Martin Gugino was pushed away after appearing to scan police communications in order to black out the equipment. OAN, I watched, he fell harder than was pushed, was aiming scanner, could be a setup." So this was where did Trump get this? As he says, this is a story from OAN, which is a wacky, it's even crazier than Fox News. They did a segment promoting these baseless conspiracies. Trump bought it hook, line, and sinker. It was sick. So yesterday, Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, is asked about this on Fox and Friends, and she doubles down with a complete trash response. Let's take a look at it.
Yesterday, the president, Kayleigh, tweeted out that this Buffalo protester, the 75-year-old who was shoved to the ground by a police officer, might have been part of Antifa and a provocateur in order to get that type of reaction, just to paraphrase. Could you expand on that? Does the president think that this guy is part of Antifa?
So the president was raising questions based on a report that he saw. They're questions that need to be asked. In every case, we can't jump on one side.
Okay, so I want to interrupt just for a moment. Trump was asking questions based on the report he saw. The report he saw was a completely speculative, irresponsible segment from a channel called OAN, which Trump increasingly loves because they kowtow to him 100% of the time rather than 98% of the time, which is what Fox News does. It's a segment which asserted no facts whatsoever. It was mere speculation. That, she says, is the basis for Trump's tweet. Let's continue.
Every case, we can't jump on one side without looking at all the facts at play. This individual had some very questionable tweets, some profanity-laden tweets.
Okay, I have to stop again. Kayleigh McEnany says 75-year-old Martin Gugino, who was attacked by police, tweeted questionable things that had swears. Let's just apply basic critical thinking. Did the officers interacting with Gugino know about his tweets when they knocked him down, causing him to bleed out of his ear and putting him in the hospital for nearly a week? Of course they didn't. They didn't know who he was. And most importantly, tweeting swear words doesn't mean that it's warranted for police to knock you over and put you in the hospital, right? I thought this was America. This is disgusting. The president's press secretary asserting as a defense of Trump attacking the protester that the protester once tweeted questionable things with swear words, if you can imagine anything more milquetoast. This is a tragedy. Let's continue.
Some profanity-laden tweets about police officers. Of course, no one condones any sort of violence. We need the appropriate amount of force used in any interaction. But there are a lot of questions in that case. In fact, you had 56 police officers who resigned in protest of how their fellow officers were treated.
So there's the grand finale. We're all disgusted that so many officers resigned in defense of the cops who did this. But Kayleigh is citing the resignations as proof that the officers were in the right. The reality is that Buffalo PD has a very long history of this type of get in line, no matter what they've done sort of nonsense. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. It's horrifying that Trump even stepped into this by tweeting things that were antagonistic of the protester. And now his press secretary is doubling down. Then she was asked about it again during her press briefing. So the clip I showed you is from Fox in the morning yesterday. Then she did a press briefing starting about 45, 50 minutes late, and she tripled down. Let's take a look at that.
Thank you so much. Does the president regret tweeting out a baseless conspiracy theory about a 75-year-old protester on the morning of George Floyd's funeral?
The president was asking questions about an interaction in a video clip he saw, and the president has the right to ask those questions.
But does he regret tweeting out this protester was assaulted?
The president does not regret standing up for law enforcement, men and women across this country.
So here Kayleigh tries to make it about Trump standing up for law enforcement. This actually weakens law enforcement. This is really an important, this is not a trivial matter here. When law enforcement does something so obviously wrong and the president defends it, it reduces trust in law enforcement, which worsens the situation on the ground. If Trump actually criticized the officers here, it would increase trust that when law enforcement so obviously misbehaves, there will be agreement that they misbehaved. We all lose when Donald Trump does this. And just one more piece of this clip about so-called facts again coming up.
Rather upon the president to have facts before he tweets anything out. He's the president of the United States.
The president did have facts before he tweeted it out that undergirded his questions.
Baseless conspiracy theory.
It's not a baseless conspiracy. No, not at all. I won't acknowledge that because, look, let's contrast this to the George Floyd situation, which that horrific video that we all saw. Every single police officer that I saw across the country came out and said, this is an inexcusable action, and I condemn this police officer. In this case, there were 57 police officers who said, I resign in protest.
So again, with the police officers who resigned, who actually should be ashamed of themselves. But more importantly, Kayleigh McEnany says Trump did have facts when he tweeted and repeated those attacks against 75-year-old Martin Gugino. He did not. All Trump had when he tweeted about this, attacking Martin Gugino, were the baseless, conspiratorial assertions of an OAN segment. This is sick. And remember that there is I don't want to call it a strategy, but there is a political impact to this, which is that sowing division is good for Trump. If he can get people doubting who's good and bad, even in such an obvious interaction as the one that Martin Gugino had with police, if people can be arguing about, well, whose side are we on? that prevents people from uniting about anything. And that is exactly what Trump needs. Trump needs a divided country so that they don't unite and realize it's obviously time for a change. It's obviously time for a change in November. Let's not fall for it. Quick reminder, chess tournament, David Pakman Show chess tournament, Tuesday, June 16 at 8 p.m. Eastern. I hope you will join. I hope you will play. We did this once before, had 500 participants. Let's go for 1,000. We will be doing the tournament on the website lichess.org, lichess.org. This is all free. You're invited. It's free to everybody. I'll be streaming the tournament, and anybody who wants to play can play. All skill levels welcome. Tuesday, 8 p.m., June 16th. Remember to get the David Pakman Show daily podcast on whatever podcasting app you prefer. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, all of those are available. And lastly, let me know what you make of this entire Martin Gugino thing. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman, and I look forward to hearing from you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. And you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Cheryl Perry and Tina Beck. Cheryl and Tina, thank you for your support. I so appreciate it. I also want to say thanks to today's longtime sustaining member of the day. That's Catherine Brophy. Catherine, you've been a member almost 5 years. Members, of course, get all of the great perks. Aside from the mood boost of knowing you're supporting alternatives to corporate media, you get the daily commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show and a bunch of other great stuff. Sign up in under a minute at joinpakman.com, and always feel free to take advantage of the 66% discount code. That code is 2020NOW. All one word, 2020NOW. Okay, some really interesting posts popped up this morning on the David Pakman Show Reddit. I encourage you to participate at davidpakman.com/Reddit. We are just 90 or so subscribers short on the Reddit of 20,000. It's free. Subscribe at davidpakman.com/Reddit. User Rickard58 or Rickard posted 100 reasons not to vote for Donald Trump in November. And in reading this, the point, and they're all perfectly good reasons, including Trump's continued lies. I mean, just to pick one thing, he said he would release his tax returns. He still hadn't, right? I mean, just like you could pick any one of these things, the tariff with China disaster, failed coronavirus response, on and on and on. There are people who are arguing that Democrats want things to be worse for the next 5 months, economically and in terms of the virus, to justify removing Donald Trump. And to every single one of them, I continue to say, Trump could stop doing bad things today and not do another, quote, bad thing for the next 5 months. He would still deserve to be removed. In other words, as a person who cares about others, I want the economy to recover as quickly as possible, and I don't want a single additional person to die of coronavirus. And even if that happened today, I would still vote to remove Donald Trump because of what he's already done. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when these right wingers talk about you're trying to make coronavirus worse to hurt Trump. Like, no, the case for removing Trump has been written already. And again, as I said, if he solves every geopolitical conflict and cures all disease in the next 5 months, come back to me and we can talk about it. But just look at what he's done for the last 3.5 years. That is a ticket to removal from the White House if I've ever seen one. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, Karaoke24 asks, if Mitt Romney was to support and endorse Joe Biden, do you think there's a chance Biden could win Utah, or is Utah too deep red? I tweeted something similar the other day. Here's my thought. I think that if Mitt Romney were to endorse Biden, it would force Trump to have to fight for Utah. I don't think Trump will ultimately lose Utah. Utah is very, very conservative, one of the most conservative states in the country. However, even in polling now, it's closer than it usually is. And certainly if Romney were to endorse Biden, Trump would have to spend money in Utah. And that would be a victory because every dollar Trump has to spend to hold Utah is a dollar he can't spend in Wisconsin or Ohio or Pennsylvania or other states that are more likely to make a difference. So I hope Romney does endorse Joe Biden. I already talked earlier this week about how some on the left are kind of missing the mark in terms of interpreting some of these Republicans who are saying, I can't vote for Trump. I just can't do it. So I would love to see it. I don't think it gives Utah to Joe Biden, but I think it does give Trump a problem where he has to spend money in Utah. A lot of posts, I'm picking just one here, but a lot of posts thrilled about my 35-minute interview / therapy session on Tuesday evening with streamer Steven Kenneth Destiny Bonnell II. Now, I know some of you guys may not know who he is. He's a figure in the Twitch gaming community and also does a lot of political debates. And here's just one of the posts about this. David and Destiny should make a podcast. That was some of the best funny content I've seen in a while. We should honestly have a David and Destiny podcast. They're both pretty funny and know a lot about the issues. I think there is a lot of demand for a podcast on both fan bases. Many requests for this. For now, it probably is going to have to remain a sort of check-in every once in a while because I'm pretty busy with everything I've got going on. But I really do appreciate that people seem to like that. If you missed it on the live stream, we put the full 35-minute interview with Steven Kenneth on the YouTube channel, and you can find it at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show, and find all of these discussions that you can participate in at davidpakman.com/Reddit, or search for The David Pakman Show in the Reddit app. I'm actually surprised that this next story continued to blow up the way that it has. Donald Trump is now demanding that a pollster apologize to him and cease and desist because a poll said that he's losing to Joe Biden and he doesn't believe that he's losing to Joe Biden, I guess. So this Monday, this poll was published from CNN. Remember that the CNN polling, first of all, is not the same as CNN, much the same way that Fox News polling is not the same as Fox News broadcast. The CNN SSRS poll said that Joe Biden is ahead of Donald Trump nationally by 14 points. This is a huge margin, 55-41. We don't know if this margin will hold. This is just one poll. Trump was furious. So first, Trump started tweeting that the poll is fake. On Tuesday, Donald Trump hired some other pollster to write a letter saying how bad the CNN poll is, including by lying about the CNN poll. So, for example, the pollster that Trump hired said that this was a poll of all adults rather than people who are going to vote. If you look at the methodology of the poll, you see very clearly it is a poll of registered voters. Now, you can make the case that a poll of likely voters would be more accurate, but the poll is a poll of registered voters. This McLaughlin guy falsely claimed it's a poll of all adults. So the debunk letter was riddled with lies. Then Donald Trump started with the legal threats, triggered Trump demanding that the poll be retracted and that CNN apologize to him. Trump says the poll has to be retracted because he feels it's not fair or accurate or well done, and that it seeks to suppress the vote for Donald Trump. Now, let me get to that. Let me get to the suppression a little bit later. The letter that was written to CNN accuses the network of trying to mislead voters through a biased questionnaire and skewed sampling, claiming they released a, quote, phony poll to cause voter suppression. Trump's cease and desist letter, which threatens legal action, is something I am not aware of ever happening in this country. The president of the United States threatening legal action over poll results that he doesn't like or disagrees with is completely outrageous. This is the type of thing you might imagine happens in, North Korea, Venezuela, China, Russia, places like that. You don't imagine that in the U.S., presidents threaten pollsters over scientific polls. Now, it's important for you to know that this poll is not that much of an outlier in terms of Trump versus Biden. So for sure, a 14-point lead for Biden is the biggest that we've seen in any poll so far. But if you look at other recent polls, Joe Biden is ahead of Trump by 10 in a few polls, by 11 in one poll. So 14 is high, but it's not like it's completely crazy where every other poll says it's a tie or Trump is winning and CNN drops a poll that says Biden plus 14. When you look at May and June, Biden's winning every poll, and it's a matter of by how much. The point is, demanding a retraction and an apology is bizarre. It shows, number one, again, Trump's a triggerable snowflake. He is so thin-skinned. Number two, Trump is insecure about what's going on with polling. And let me dig into that a little bit. And this is what I was going to get to earlier. Trump claims that a poll showing Biden is winning will suppress or is trying to suppress Trump voters from turning out. That only would be true if your voters don't really like you that much, because in general, if I find out that the candidate I support is down, if anything, that makes me more likely to go out and vote. In other words, here in Massachusetts, I'm voting no matter what. In Massachusetts, Biden is likely to win. If the polling says Biden is up 30 in Massachusetts, I'm going to vote because I vote no matter what. But I might be less urgently voting than if a poll came out and said Massachusetts in play, Trump only down 2 in Massachusetts. Then I'm voting either way, but I'm even more definitely going to get out and vote, if that makes sense. So Trump's analysis that saying Biden is winning is a way to try to suppress Trump supporters from voting, they must be very unenthusiastic supporters if they would be moved not to vote because their guy is losing. In a lot of parts of the country, with a lot of types of people, if you see your candidate is down or that it's close, you are damn sure going to get out to vote. So that's that. Now, in terms of CNN's response, they said they stand by the poll as expected. That they did the poll. They're a good pollster. That's it. Imagine ESPN being told, hey, you've got to report a different final score, right? Imagine that the Boston Celtics defeat the Washington, what are they called now? The Washington, I forget what is the name of the Washington? It used to be the Wizards. I'm sorry. Imagine the Celtics defeat the Wizards by 10 and Wizards management calls ESPN and says, could you report a different score, please? Because we just don't really agree that that's the score. How does a Trump voter see this and see Trump as the alpha male that he claims to be? He doesn't like a poll, so he cries and says everyone's being unfair to him and sends a legal threat. It's a cowardly move. Go win an election if you're sure that the poll is fake, and then we'll have all the proof we need, assuming it's a fair election, which Donald Trump is trying to ensure it will not be. To be honest, I feel like the presidency of Trump is far more fake than this CNN poll. But ultimately, we will know in 5 months, 4.5 months at this point, 5 months, 4 months, 3 weeks, whether these polls reflect a rising tide against Donald Trump or whether he's going to be able to pull it off. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Many exciting things are happening there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Bernie Sanders is increasingly in trouble, mostly with folks who describe themselves as supporters of Bernie just a few weeks or a couple of months ago. And part of this was Bernie Sanders endorsing Joe Biden. That enraged some people on the left. And Bernie Sanders now said in a new interview in very definitive terms, basically exactly what I said on Monday about this entire abolish the police, defund the police thing, which was he's not for defunding the police, that some departments need more money, but that many changes and reforms have to be made. And this was a very wide-ranging interview with the New Yorker. I encourage you to check out the entire thing. But listen, call me a neoliberal right-wing nut, but I agree with Bernie Sanders, which increasingly has people furious with me as well, which is just a strange turn of events. Let's look at what Bernie said. Bernie, when asked about these defund the police movements, said, quote, "Do I think we should not have police departments in America? No, I don't. There's no city in the world that does not have police departments." Okay, so this is just a hard no on actually getting rid of police departments. Fair enough. So, some people are angry with this, but some folks believe this part is reasonable. Bernie goes on. What you need are, I didn't call for more money for police departments. I called for police departments that have well-educated, well-trained, well-paid professionals. And too often around the country right now, you have police officers who take the job at very low payment, don't have much education, don't have much training, and I want to change that. So again, Bernie pointing out, sometimes police are underpaid. Sometimes police are undertrained. Sometimes a department doesn't have enough officers to actually do community policing rather than what I call cheap policing. So that's me editorializing. I'm now adding on to what Bernie Sanders said. Bernie goes on, quote, "I also called for the transformation of police departments into understanding that many police departments and cops deal every day with issues of mental illness, deal with issues of addiction and all kinds of issues which should be dealt with by mental health professionals or others, and not just by police officers." So again, Bernie's spot on. Exactly as I said on Monday, I added mental health training for officers themselves to better de-escalate, adding to police departments more mental health workers straight up who can request support from police if necessary. Bernie goes on to say, quote, "I think we want to redefine what police departments do, give them the support they need to make their jobs better defined. So I do believe that we need well-trained, well-educated, and well-paid professionals in police departments. Anyone who thinks that we should abolish all police departments in America, I don't agree." So this is very straightforward. I like that Bernie is also pointing out that a lot of times when we look at funding, we would mostly, I believe, all agree that funding for military-like elements for police, including certain weapons and riot gear, armed vehicles, etc., that is funding that should be cut. But cutting salaries, particularly when in many parts of the country police are dramatically underpaid, including being so underpaid relative to the cost of living that they have to live far from the area they are policing, which is not good for the community. I made this point earlier this week. Sometimes you actually may need to increase the amount that is going to salaries, as an example, while decreasing the amount that is going to militarization and equipment. So there have been two primary reactions to Bernie Sanders saying this. One reaction is people are furious with Bernie Sanders once again. Bernie sold out again, just like he sold out by endorsing Joe Biden. And to them, I say, what really happened here? Like, in other words, did you so misjudge Bernie all of these years? You believed he was the most honest politician, the most genuine politician, the best guy that we needed. And then now in 6 weeks, Bernie says, I'm endorsing Biden and we should vote for him, and defund the police is not something that you need to have police. And now you realize that all along for the last year, 2 years, 5 years, however long you've supported Bernie, your assessment of him was just wrong. What does that say about your judgment if that is your reaction? Now, the other response has been, well, abolish the police, defund the police. It's not literal. It's a metaphor for reform. But that is where a lot of the problem is coming from. These conversations of, we've got to defund the police and abolish, dismantle police departments. Well, no, you do need police, though. Like, who are you going to call in the middle of the night if someone burgles your house? Well, no, oh, no. I mean, I don't actually mean defund or abolish the police. What I mean is the stuff David Pakman said on Monday. Well, then maybe we agree, but the movement needs to do better branding, because there are some people who do want to abolish the police. But either way, the right is seizing on it, and we're getting crushed. Right-wing media has spent all week just arguing about the left wants to defund and abolish the police, when even a lot of the people saying it don't actually want to do that. So it does, to me, seem like Bernie's position might just be too status quo and not radical enough for some of Bernie's most ardent followers. That actually may be the case, even without strawmanning or mischaracterizing Bernie's position, or without making a personal attack on Bernie. It's possible that Bernie's position on this issue is just not radical enough for some of the people that supported Bernie in 2016 and in 2020. Now, I saw one other perspective when researching this. I saw some Bernie supporters who said, we don't really believe Bernie means this. So understand what the argument is. There are some Bernie supporters who believe that deep down, Bernie does want to abolish the police. But in this interview, he's pretending that he doesn't in order to mainstream Joe Biden's view, which is the same, and that it's sort of like a tactic. In other words, Bernie wants to defund the police, but as a posturing move to help Biden, Bernie's lying and pretending that he doesn't want to defund the police. If you believe that, then you believe that Bernie Sanders is incredibly dishonest, and I don't know how you could otherwise support him. Like, if you believe Bernie is actually just straight up lying in this way, then you should question why you're even still defending Bernie in any way. I don't know. If I'm honest with you guys, and I would never be anything less than honest with you, I'm actually concerned about how quickly some Bernie supporters abandoned Bernie after he endorsed Biden and said a few pragmatic things. And a lot of Bernie supporters abandoned Bernie very quickly, attributed the most bad faith interpretations to everything that Bernie has said and done since suspending his campaign and endorsing Joe Biden. Like, this was the guy for you, and you abandon him this quickly and say he's either disingenuous or a shill for Biden or whatever. To me, that makes me question whether you were really that strong of a Bernie supporter from the get-go, or you were only supportive of him as far as he was saying the things you wanted to hear. And it wasn't really Bernie you supported. It was Bernie as long as he says what you want to hear. And then as soon as he doesn't, Bernie's no longer, the genuine thinker that many said that he was. I don't know, but it is definitely concerning what we're seeing. This next story is a political story, but it's also sort of a math story. I love a good math story. And this math story has to do with the fact that a lot of people don't understand percentage versus percentage points. Now, to people who do understand the difference, please accept my sincere apology that I have to do this right now. But the amount of confusion over this over the last 24 hours has forced my hand, and I have to do this. So here's the headline. Donald Trump's approval rating is down 10 points, or you could also say 10 percentage points in the last month. So early in the coronavirus pandemic, Donald Trump's approval actually went up all the way up to 49% in the Gallup tracking poll. It is now down to 39%. So Trump's approval went from 49% to 39%. That's a decline of 10 points. The problem here is that some people don't understand the difference between percent and percentage points. Others understand the concept, but are using the wrong term and just confusing other people. So let's just work through a very quick example. If someone has 50% approval and their approval goes down by 10%, strictly speaking, that would mean 50%, 10% of 50 is 5. That means if you have 50% approval and approval goes down 10%, you go from 50 to 45, okay? 10% of 50 is 5. So far, I think we're clear. If you have an approval of 50% and it drops 10 points, also said 10 percentage points, that's a decline of 10 actual points, meaning you went from 50 to 40. You lost 10 points. 50 minus 10 is 40. The confusion comes when we're talking about percent changes to things already measured in percent, okay? So In this case, our real world numbers are Trump's approval spiked to 49 and then dropped to 39 in a 1 month period. That's a 10-point decline, but it is about a 20% decline to his approval, right? If you lose 10 out of 49, that's about 20%. And if you're now thoroughly confused, forget everything I've said. The news part of this story is that Trump's approval went from 49 to 39. That's a very rapid decline. In fact, I think it's the largest 1 month decline that Trump has seen at any time during his presidency. Now, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that clearly Donald Trump's approval is not immune from his actions. In other words, the failed coronavirus response, the totalitarian instincts that came to light after the George Floyd killing and the protests that started, this has hurt Donald Trump. That's good. He's not immune. The bad news is that somehow 4 out of 10 Americans still think he's doing a good job. So this may be a good time to remind you that when it comes to presidential approval, when you think about how divided the country is, presidential approval adds up to 100, but there's not really 100 points of approval in play. There's some portion of people who, for ideological reasons, will never approve of the job that the president does. I don't know if that's like, 10%, 15%, 20, I'm not really sure. On the other side, you've got people who will never abandon Trump no matter what he does. That could be 15, 20, 25%. I don't know exactly what it is right now, but the point is Trump's bottom for approval is not 0 and his top for approval is not 100. Even with George W. Bush, when things were less partisan, after 9/11, Bush saw a massive spike in approval to 90 or 88%, something like that. That was probably his ceiling, and those were the absolutely most extenuating circumstances. So the point is, when Trump's approval moves from 49 to 39, 49 to 39, it's in that range. It's really a lot more than that because the bottom is not 0 and the top is not 100. Pick what numbers you think it is. With Trump, it's probably something like, I don't think his approval, no matter what he does, would go below 25 or maybe even 28, something like that. And I don't think it would go higher than probably 80, no matter what he does. So in the context of a range that is more like 28 to 80, a 10-point swing is pretty significant. But there's a lot of people in this country who will never abandon him. It might be for their own self-esteem. They don't want to admit to themselves that they made a mistake when they voted Trump in 2016. And the way to at least trick your brain into thinking you didn't make a mistake is to vote for him again in 2020. There's this quote incorrectly attributed to Mark Twain. It's still a good quote, just not Mark Twain. The quote is, "It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they've been fooled." And along those lines, we have to understand why a lot of 2016 Trump voters are going to vote for him again. Some may abandon him, and there's a very small margin there that Trump can afford to lose before it becomes almost impossible to win re-election. But understand, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled, and it is very relevant in the times of Trump. We'll take a quick break and be back with much more right after this. Make sure you're following me on Instagram for the latest urban garden and puppy updates at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're living in a very unusual timeline, my friends. Stock Car Racing League, NASCAR, has banned the Confederate flag at all events and properties, period. While the President of the United States on the same day, a rich guy raised in New York City, is loudly defending Confederate-named military bases in the United States, says he will not change the names of those bases. And is being called the Confederacy's second president by a Republican group. So especially for our viewers outside the U.S., but also for people in the United States, just as a sort of refresher, the Confederate flag was the flag of the Confederacy in the American Civil War. You had the Union versus the Confederacy. Some called it North versus South. The Confederacy fighting for slavery. Sometimes they say they were fighting for states' rights, to which I always like to say states' rights to continue having legal slavery. Whereas the Union was fighting to abolish slavery. Of course, the Union won and slavery was abolished, and the effects of slavery, of course, took much longer than just that war to actually deal with. But there are parts of this country where Confederate flags are sometimes also called the rebel flag. They are revered or fetishized in some way. Even in the sort of hill towns in Western Massachusetts where I went, near where I went to high school, you would have places just 10 or 15 miles out of Northampton, Massachusetts, which is a super liberal little city, that, you know, the guys thought it was cool to drive into the vocational school with a pickup truck that bore a Confederate flag on the back. And there are those who I believe rightly see it as a symbol of hatred and oppression. And there are others who say it is a symbol of history and heritage. But in any case, it is widely now in popular culture being eliminated. And I quite frankly, I believe that it should be. I mean, would we apply, look at the losers in other conflicts, losers that are fortunately losers because they wanted horrible things. Like, could we say that displaying Nazi flags just because they lost is just, it's history? Like there was a German military and it's just like, okay, guys, it's an extreme example, but I find it to be in very, very poor taste. Now, this gets us to NASCAR. NASCAR in the United States is not known for being made up of the most progressive people. Now, I'm not saying NASCAR fans are all racists, but it's certainly a sport that leans more conservative in terms of its fan base. And it's one of the few places where Donald Trump can actually get himself a crowd that cheers instead of a crowd that boos. And it is a place where, unfortunately, Confederate flags are certainly more common than in other sports. You don't tend to see Confederate flags at NBA games. You don't tend to see Confederate flags at Major League Soccer matches. And as far as I know, they wouldn't even be allowed in, to be perfectly frank. But you do see them at NASCAR races until now. NASCAR has now banned the display of the Confederate flag at all events and properties. And notably, NASCAR also removed its rule that says racing team members have to stand for the national anthem. And we've seen a number of sports leagues now say, if you don't want to stand, you actually don't have to stand. So every indication here is NASCAR sees what's happening nationally since the killing of George Floyd. Bubba Wallace, one of their racers, has been very supportive. Drivers, I think they're called, has been, shows what I know, has been very supportive of the protests. And they are making a decision that there is going to be no more Confederate stuff at their races. Now, is it because everybody involved morally believes that there shouldn't be Confederate flags? I don't know. Certainly, they've made the business decision that there will be no more Confederate flags there. Not everybody's happy. NASCAR Truck Series driver Ray Ciccarelli wrote on his Facebook page he's going to quit after this season because Confederate flags have been banned. Have fun, buddy. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. And then here's the real amazing contrast. Look at the last 24 hours in NASCAR, okay? And compare that to the last 24 hours of Trump. Trump putting out a statement and tweeting that he will not change the names of Confederacy-themed military bases, saying, quote, "It has been suggested that we should rename as many as 10 of our legendary military bases, such as Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Fort Hood in Texas, Fort Benning in Georgia. These monumental and very powerful bases have become part of a great American heritage and a history of winning, victory, and freedom. The United States of America trained and deployed these our heroes on these hallowed grounds and won 2 world wars. Therefore, my administration will not even consider the renaming of these magnificent and fabled military installations. Our history as the greatest nation in the world will not be tampered with. Respect our military." Now, what's funny about respect our military is that, remember, the Union won the Civil War, meaning that the military should be respected. The military that should be respected is the military that fought against the Confederacy because we won, the Union won. So when you name the forts after the side that lost, that was killing the precursor to our current military, the Confederacy that fought for slavery, doesn't really make a lot of sense because you've named forts after people who were against our military. They did not respect our military. So listen, this is not the biggest issue. I don't really care what the forts are called, although it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that we name them after the losers who wanted to keep slaves. But who would have guessed as Barack Obama was leaving office that during the subsequent presidential term, NASCAR would take the more progressive stance of banning the Confederate flag compared to the president who defends Confederacy era statues, figures, heroes, whatever they like to call them. Republican group, the Lincoln Project, which is a Republican group that opposes Trump, has now come out and said Trump is the Confederacy's second president. This is a Republican group which put out a statement where they said, we never imagined when we named our initiative to defeat the reelection of Trump, the Lincoln Project, that the president would go as far as honoring the Confederate generals who fought against the United States to preserve slavery and uphold white supremacy. For all intents and purposes, Trump today became the Confederacy's second president. We cannot allow this. And then they go on to say, we need help from Republicans to remove Donald Trump in November. Strange times, but I believe the decision by NASCAR is the correct one, whatever their reasons for doing it. And it's probably a mix of understanding the way society is going, combined with the fact that it's probably a bad PR move to continue having these flags displayed. They did ultimately come to the right decision. A Republican wonders whether colored people, his word, colored people, get coronavirus more because they don't know or refuse to wash their hands. In other words, are dirty immigrants more likely to get coronavirus and they happen to be the colored ones? This is the question from a guy who should never show his face in public again. His name is Steve Huffman. He's a Republican state senator in Ohio. Didn't really have to tell you he was a Republican. As some of you know, coronavirus is disproportionately hitting the non-white population of the United States. There are different reasons why. Some of our non-white populations in the U.S. have more underlying health conditions that can be linked to poverty. Often poverty brings with it poor health. Pre-existing conditions appear to predispose people to more serious cases of coronavirus. You then also have to account for sometimes having access to inferior medical services. There's a lot of different factors here, but the point is, we know that minorities, including Black Americans, are being disproportionately hit by coronavirus. During a hearing about racism, Ohio State Senator Steve Huffman asked, is it possible that the Black and colored population might be getting hit harder by coronavirus because they don't wash their hands as well as white people, essentially proposing the idea that these folks are dirtier. They're not washing their hands as well or as frequently. Now, get ready for this. Huffman is a doctor. He said, quote, my point is, I understand African Americans have a higher incidence of chronic conditions, and it makes them more susceptible to death from COVID. But why it doesn't make them more susceptible to just get COVID? Could it just be that African Americans or the colored population do not wash their hands as well as other groups or wear a mask or do not socially distance themselves? That could be the explanation of the higher incidence. Now, God, the Ohio Commission on Minority Health's director, Angela Dawson, said what Huffman is asserting is not the opinion of leading medical experts in this country. That probably doesn't come as a surprise to you. So either the implication is Black people don't wash their hands correctly because they don't know how, or Black people don't wash their hands correctly because they're dirty and they don't care to wash their hands. Pick your explanation as to what Steve Huffman is saying here. And then, of course, this reference to the colored population. Like, what year are we in again? And for me, this is more proof that we need more people from younger generations who it would never even occur to use this language in these positions of power. And it's also a reminder that just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you're necessarily smart. Look at some of the things Ben Carson believes, if you need proof of that. Now, one last thing. Let's, for a second, take seriously the question of, are there hand washing differences among populations? Because this has been studied. We're linking to one such study. And the conclusions from this study were that women tend to wash their hands more and better. In other words, using soap and scrubbing long enough. Women are better hand washers than men. And non-white people are better hand washers than white people. When this has been studied, disproportionately, white men are the worst offenders when it comes to bathroom hand washing. We're linking to this study in the description to the YouTube video for this story. Certainly something to think about. This guy should never show his face in public again. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's something great. A self-described boomer called into the show. This woman is delightful. She has the requisite David Pakman Show playing in the background while she leaves the voicemail. This is just a classic now for David Pakman Show callers. We had a call last week from someone who said, why aren't the boomers out protesting? And I pointed out, it always tends to be younger populations that disproportionately protest. And we have a pandemic that disproportionately affects older folks. So it seems totally expected and reasonable that we're not seeing as many baby boomers out protesting. Check out this voicemail from my new favorite David Pakman Show caller.
Hi, I'm a boomer. I'm 68 years old. And you know what? There are a lot of boomers out there protesting. But those of us who have respiratory disease and who are extremely vulnerable to the coronavirus really hesitate about putting ourselves into big groups of people.
Of course.
So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Makes absolute perfect sense. Delightful, self-described boomer with the David Pakman Show playing in the background. You were completely right. And this was exactly what I said. And it just makes sense. And listen, after what happened to Martin Gugino, 75-year-old protester who got knocked down by police, hit the back of his head, bled from his ear, and spent nearly a week in the hospital, if you're going to assume that as an older person, the police won't manhandle you, that is not being borne out. We have at least a half a dozen incidents, including the elderly man walking with a cane. I forget where, maybe it was Atlanta, although if it wasn't, I apologize, who was knocked down by police. There's a bunch of these incidents. So I don't believe for a second that the so-called boomers necessarily don't support what's going on, but they seem to understand the risks associated with gathering in large crowds. We're seeing what's happening in Texas, Florida, as they've reopened, spiking cases. It's ugly. So I totally understand and respect what they're doing. Here's something fun. Things are so negative lately. Come on and do something fun. Tuesday night, this is Tuesday, June 16, 8 p.m. Eastern time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific. David Pakman Show chess tournament number 2. I don't care if you have never played chess. I mean, you want to know how the pieces move. But the point is, open to all skill levels. Join the tournament. We will be streaming it live at 8 p.m. Eastern, but you don't have to just watch me play in the tournament. You can play in it. You can register on lichess.org so that you're ready to go. That's lichess.org. It's going to be great. We had 500 people roughly play last time. I'm hoping that we do far better than that this time. And of course, remember that we have a daily free podcast that you can sign up for on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, Google Play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The daily audio podcast, another great way to receive the show. On today's bonus show, we will be covering Dr. Anthony Fauci's latest coronavirus comments. We will talk about U.S. soccer lifting the ban on kneeling during the national anthem. And Amazon has banned police use of its face recognition technology for a year. Is this PR BS or significant? All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Become a member at joinpakman.com, and we'll see you on the bonus show or tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching today's full episode of the show. Just a reminder, today's sponsor is Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist for free and save 25% off of a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've also included the link right underneath this video.